The silence across the dusty plains at dawn carried a weight that pressed cold against your spine before the sun had even lifted its first timid finger over the horizon. The sky was a pale winter blue, stretching endlessly, washed out like faded denim. Your boots, crusted with the dried grime of yesterday's ride, bit into the cracked earth beneath you, every step crunching with the stubborn bite of the parched trail. The sharp tang of sweat hung heavy in the dry wind, mingling with the smoky ghost of last night's campfire, a scent that clung to your clothes like a stubborn memory you couldn't shake. You could feel the rough leather of your saddle in your fingers, worn thin from hours of tightening knots that never seemed to hold. Your hands ached from the endless grind, muscles tense from the monotony that stretched as long as the horizon itself. Horses snorted and stamped their hooves impatiently, their breath puffing faint clouds in the cold morning air, urging you to hurry with the routine rituals of the day. Life as a cowboy in the Wild West did not romanticize the sunset rides or heroic showdowns anyone might expect. Instead, it meant relentless days under a sun that seemed determined to crack your skin and weary your soul. The fences needed repairing. Again, the hay bales, stiff and pokey, demanded stacking by aching arms, barely rested from yesterday's labor. Breakfast was a dry chunk of hardtack, flavorless and as tough as the soil beneath your feet. If you thought being out of cell service today was a modern form of torture, imagine the dread of seeing your last piece of firewood crumble into ash and knowing you'd wake to freezing emptiness. Your teeth rattled loose in your jaw from the constant gnawing on stale rations, and the ever-present risk of infection from the smallest scrape was a silent enemy, as far from medical help as the nearest town lay from your tired boots. The distant howls of coyotes echoed over the vast, lonely expanse, mixing with the creak of leather and the tinny clink of metal tools in the early morning light. Still, for a brief moment, as the faint glow of dawn kissed the campfire's dying embers, there was warmth shared among the tired faces of your fellow riders, a fragile beacon of solidarity in a brutal world. But morning's fragile calm shattered the instant a sudden silence fell. Even the dogs, alert protectors of the ranch, stopped barking abruptly. Eyes exchanged in the stillness, conveying a wordless tension that sent a shiver crawling beneath your sweat-soaked shirt. Something was coming, something not weathered by dust or time. Hey, before Morpheus takes you for good, double-check you're still subscribed. For some, the button vanished, and I don't want you to miss the next Sleepy Tales. While you're at it, drop a pillow-soft like and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this quiet little corner alive. Thanks for being part of it. The sudden silence stretched between you and the horizon like a thick, suffocating blanket. The barely perceptible whisper of the wind ceased, as if even the earth itself held its breath, You tightened your grip on the worn leather reins, breath visible in the cold air. Your heartbeat sinking with the anxious stamping of horses around you. Each animal's restless shuffle echoed against the cracked expanse, betraying the quiet calm that just moments ago seemed unbreakable. Up ahead, the pale light of dawn refused to warm the world. Shadows clung stubbornly to the hollows, pooling beneath scraggly bushes and jagged rocks, where last night's stars still flickered faintly, wrinkled in the early morning gaze. Your boots dug into dust, so dry it shivered beneath each step, crunching, cracking, like brittle bones, whispered the secrets of every traveler's weary passage. The cold bit through your coat, settling deep beneath your skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill crawling along your spine now. The tension in the air was a thief, stealing the calm before the storm without warning. A low murmur broke through the quiet, distant voices, fragmented and strained, carrying urgency. They hadn't come from the settlement far behind, nor from your camp, but from somewhere approaching. Your instincts sharpened, muscles coiling like spring traps beneath your weathered shirt. Eyes flicked to the others, faces shadowed but alert, scanning the horizon where the first color of light seeped through. The horses growled, noses flaring as they caught the scent of something unfamiliar and sharp, like smoke from a distant fire where none should be. The scent tugged at your memory. Something burned, but not wood. Something darker. You exchanged a look with one of the younger riders, his jaw set tight, eyes narrowing. No words passed between you, yet the question echoed silently. What is coming across the plains? And are we ready? You thought again of the fences needing repair, of the endless chores that keep a man's hands raw and his spirit dull. But this was no ordinary day. The mundane had folded itself away, replaced instead by a creeping unease that refused to settle. Your fingers itched to reach for your rifle, crude but reliable. The cold metal pressing into your palm offered a faint anchor against the uncertainty. You ran a rough, blistered thumb along its edge, a small comfort in a world that offered too few. The silhouettes appeared, vague and halting at first. Shapes that blurred with the smoke rising slowly against the pale sky. Then, figures took form, a ragged group, faces obscured by dust and desperation. Their pace was uneven, some limping, others carrying what little they could salvage from God knows where. From the worn leather of your saddle to the cracked soil beneath the horse's hooves, everything about this early morning pulse throbbed with raw, gritty reality. No romantic showdown here, no heroic rescue rides painted in the blood-red hues of a western sunset. Just survival, stark, gritty, merciless. The newcomers drew closer, their eyes hollowed by hunger and thirst, their clothes torn and layered with grime that spoke of weeks on the run. You recognized the signs, the tail end of some tragedy, breadcrumbs of disaster scattered across the naked land. Their leader, a woman, whose dark hair clung to her face in tangled strands, paused and scanned the horizon with sharp eyes. She met yours momentarily, and in that brief connection, you felt the weight of countless stories packed into her weary gaze. Your mouth dried. You swallowed back a bitter taste, not just from the dust, but from the knowledge that, however many times you faced hardship alone, this was something new, something that threatened to undo more than fences or hay bales. The few riders nearest you shifted uneasily, unearthed fears stirring beneath their practiced calm. The earliest warmth of the sun crept up, spilling gold over creased faces, lighting fires in hollow cheeks, and softening the hard angles carved by endless toil. For a moment, the world seemed to hold a fragile breath, a heartbeat hanging between dread and hope. Then, a sudden sharp snap, a twig crushed underfoot, shattered the stillness. The horses flared wide-eyed. The woman's group halted abruptly, hands rising, empty save for desperation. You felt the chamber of your rifle click, a sound louder than thunder in the hush of dawn. But the moment passed, not with gunfire, but with a faint whimper carried on the dry wind. Behind the woman, a child stumbled forward, frail and dust-caked, clutching a tattered doll. Their eyes locked on yours, and for a flicker of time, the world reduced itself to that fragile, trembling soul. You lowered the rifle slowly. The solidity of the weapon didn't vanish, but settled back into your side, like a shadow still watching. Something in the look of that child whispered stories you couldn't ignore, about places burned to ash, about people lost and desperate. The wind shifted, carrying away the last embers of your campfire's warmth, and leaving behind a cold so sharp it sang through your bones. Beyond that, behind the gathering figures, the wasteland stretched endlessly, silent but heavy with menace. You swallowed hard, and then, out of the dust and silence, a voice broke, cracked and low. "You don't want to see what's coming behind us," it said. Before you could ask what, the ground beneath seemed to tremble ever so slightly, a subtle quake born not of earth, but of something far larger. The kind of tremor that whispers warnings too deep to hear clearly, but loud enough to feel in the marrow of your bones. Your eyes flicked back to the pale horizon where the sun barely painted the sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the hunger and the dust, something was moving faster than the dawn, and it was coming straight for you. The woman's eyes stayed fixed on yours, a heartbeat longer, dark pools reflecting pain and determination, tangled in equal measure. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but the wind snatched the words away before they could form. Instead, the dust swirled in jagged eddies between you, a silent dance of desperation and unspoken warnings. The child, clutching that faded doll like a lifeline, took a hesitant step forward. You saw the thin ribs beneath ragged clothes, the cracked lips quivering with exhaustion. A shiver, not born of the cold, ran twisted down your spine. You ached to reach out, to offer balm, but all you had was the hard iron of your rifle and the brittle kindness of wary eyes. Behind them, the wasteland stretched once more, vast and implacable. Somewhere beyond that jagged horizon, the tremors whispered their secrets louder, and you could almost hear the earth groan beneath the weight of something ancient stirring. The younger rider at your side shifted, fingers tightening on his reins. You glanced sideways. He was as pale as the morning light, sweat beading along his temple despite the chill. None of you had spoken since the first murmur reached your ears, but an unspoken accord passed like a pulse. This was no ordinary arrival. The woman finally found her voice, low and cracked from thirst or smoke. It was hard to tell. "They're coming," she said, eyes flicking to the ridge behind your camp. "A storm like nothing we faced." You swallowed, not the usual gnaw of dust and dry bread, but a bitter knot of something heavier, foreboding. You scanned the horizon again, now with a sharper, almost desperate focus. War had left scars here before, but this felt different, more primal, like the land itself was warning you. The horses beneath you shifted restlessly. Their movements cracked the brittle silence like unsettled chords plucked on an old guitar string. The child's grip tightened on her doll, the fragile thread that still connected her to an innocence lost long ago. In that moment, the fire that had died to ashes beside your camp flickered faintly, as if summoned by the rising tension. Its glow, a sliver of warmth, barely brushed the cracked skin of your calloused hands, but it grounded you. The cold was no longer just a bite. It was a threat clawing closer. The ragged group began to move again, slow and uneven steps, carrying the weight of countless miles and shattered hopes. The woman's gaze was fixed forward, vigilant and fierce. You felt the stories woven into her scars, a tapestry of survival written in dust and tears. It was then you noticed the shadow trailing behind them, shifting and flickering across the cracked earth. Not part of the group, but something else, larger. A sudden gust swirled the dust at your feet, lifting twisted leaves and dry weeds into the air. The scent hit you then, smoke, bitter and metallic. Not wood, not the campfire from last night. Burning oil, maybe, or something worse. The horses nearly stampeded, nostrils flaring in alarm. You gave a silent command, heart pounding in your chest like a war drum. The younger rider's hand hovered over his rifle, pale lips pressed tight. For a slow moment, the two groups faced each other. Weary survivors on one side, cautious cowboys on the other, caught in a fragile truce born of necessity and fear. Then the woman raised her hand, a peace signal in a land that knows few. But peace was a fleeting thing here. A distant rumble stirred the earth anew, subtle at first, like the low growl of a beast awakening. Then it deepened, rolling through the plains with the weight of doom. The horses shied, ears flattening, hooves scraping hard earth in a frantic rhythm. "Whatever's out there," the woman whispered, eyes wide, "it doesn't care about borders or fences." Your mind flicked back to cracked wood and frayed rope, to the dry hay that poked like needles through your gloves. All forgotten. This was survival stripped bare, a harsh reckoning that no man mending fences could prepare for. You wished for a simpler enemy, a bullet to fire, a clear target. Instead, dread wove itself into the morning twilight like tangled barbed wire. And still the ground trembled, a subtle pulse beneath your boots that promised a storm no amount of stubbornness could hold off. The child beside you whimpered softly, clutching her doll tighter, but even that fragile comfort seemed too small against the vast canvas of dust and dangers approaching fast. Your gaze caught the woman's once more. There was no heroism in her eyes, only grim resolve mirrored in your own reflection. This was not a story of glory or dusty gunfights under painted skies. It was about enduring the quiet dread that coils before chaos. You exhaled slowly, letting the cold air fill your lungs and steady your shaking hands. The rifle, heavy in your grip, was suddenly lighter, not because safety had arrived, but because the unseen threat hadn't struck yet. Then, without warning, the horizon split with a sudden flare of orange, a distant blaze licking the edges of dawn, like the breath of something out of control. The woman's voice cut through the growing roar, sharp and steady. "It's coming." And as your eyes narrowed to that blazing line in the distance, the earth beneath your horse shuddered one last time, hard enough to throw dust in the air and send a tremor through your very bones. The silence shattered. Something ancient stirred beyond the plains, faster than the sun's first light, unstoppable in its drift toward you. The sharp flare of orange still burned behind the ridge, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to claw toward you like the fingers of some restless ghost. Your horse shifted beneath you, uneasy as the earth settled with an almost imperceptible tremor under your boots. That distant blaze wasn't just a fire. It was a signal, the scream of a world about to spin off its axis. The woman's face remained steadfast, marked by lines that told stories of loss and resilience. But her eyes flickered. With a raw flicker of fear, she bit her lip and then spoke, voice hoarse but steady. "It's not just smoke, it's destruction, riding the wind." You swallowed a dry mouthful, dust coating your throat. The cold air now pressed sharp and biting again, as if nature itself tried to warn you away. But the tired faces watching you your fellow riders, the ragged newcomers, even the child clutching her ragged doll, held silent questions, unspoken but deafening. A faint rumble rolled across the plains, deeper now, like the growl of something vast and hungry stirring beneath the surface. Horses nearby nickered uneasily, shifting their weight as the ground seemed to pulse beneath them. A slow heartbeat syncing with your own. The woman's gaze flicked backward once, toward the trails she and her group had traveled to reach this fragile haven. There's more. Behind us, she said quietly, things scraped from the edge of nightmares, things that don't rest. Your fingers tightened on the reins, the worn leather rough beneath your calloused palms. The rifle rested heavy at your side, a silent promise of protection. But even that certainty felt fragile against the threat drawing near, like a paper shield in a gathering storm. One of the younger riders, pale-faced and sweat beading at his temple, despite the cold, swallowed hard and leaned close enough for you to catch the strained whisper. "Whatever it is," he said, voice cracking, "it's moving too fast, faster than anything we've seen before." A gust stirred the dust in lazy spirals, the dry scent of earth and smoke mingling, drifting through the air with a bitterness that coated your lungs. A sharp, acrid bite, like metal burning, or oil spilled over dry grass, pricked at your senses. The horses' nostrils flared wide, and their restless stamping quickened. From the edge of your vision, the ragged group shuffled forward cautiously, eyes darting between you and the horizon. The child, pale and fragile, took a hesitant step, doll dangling limply by her side. Her cracked lips parted, as if to speak, but no sound came. The weight of countless miles, countless losses, pressed on her slender shoulders. You exhaled, a plume of cold breath, lost to the dawn. The early light illuminated the brittle strain that etched itself into every face around you. No one had spoken for long moments, a shared silence hammered by the growing crescendo of tension. Then, without warning, a sharp crack echoed through the air, branches snapping under heavy feet. The horses flared, eyes wide, heads tossing. Toward the west, where the horizon blistered in fiery orange, dust trembled like restless spirits racing across the land. Suddenly, from that fiery ring of light, shapes erupted into the bleak dawn. Dust-caked, ragged figures moving with a wild urgency, silhouettes glimpsed between smoky embers. Neither friend nor enemy, but something else, something worn thin by desperation, and whatever horrors trailed behind them. You lifted your rifle in one smooth motion, the metal cold and steady against your palm, but your hands trembled. Whether from cold or fear, you couldn't tell. The woman did not falter. Only her eyes widened, shadows deepening beneath the long lashes. "They're fleeing," she whispered, voice rough. "But what comes after them? It doesn't care. The distant rumbles swelled, waves of sound rolling over the plains like a dark tide. It was no ordinary thunder, no distant storm. It felt alive, predatory, and it carried a warning unlike any you had ever heard. Your pulse raced, drowning the dry crunch of cracked earth beneath your boots. You scanned the horizon again. Beyond the fleeing shapes, something loomed, a vague outline that grew clearer with every heartbeat. A monstrous presence, forged in dust and shadow, trailing a wake of destruction. For a sliver of a breath, you imagined the world pausing, the moment stretched thin, fragile like a thread about to snap. Every sinew, every nerve, concentrated in that frozen instant between calm and chaos. Then a howl rose from the far edge of the ridge. Not canine, not human, something guttural and broken. The horses reared, ears flattening, their panic electric, spreading through the group like wildfire. The woman tightened her grip on her makeshift pack. "They'll be here before noon," she said, voice low but fierce. "All of it." You glanced down at the child, whose wide eyes caught yours, an ocean of fear and fragile hope in their depths. She clutched her doll tighter, knuckles white. For a fleeting moment, the cold wind seemed to pause, cradling the fragile bond between you. The sun, now a pale orb climbing over the plains, caught a glint off something metallic, half buried in the dust a few paces ahead. You nudged your horse forward and dismounted, boots crunching as you crouched. It was a twisted piece of metal, charred, shattered, unrecognizable. A remnant of a world touched by fire and chaos, far beyond the fences and hay bales you knew. You lifted it carefully, the weight seeming heavier than it looked. A token of destruction encroaching upon this fragile patch of earth. Behind you, the low rumble deepened again. The horses stirred nervously, snorting into the chill. The wind carried the scent of burning oil and something fouler, metallic, sharp, a foreign poison riding the air. The woman's voice cut through the growing noise, steady and cold. "Prepare yourself. This is no storm of dust. It's the end of what we knew." Heart pounding, like the wild thunder of hooves. You looked back at the horizon, where the rising sun fought against a shadow creeping faster than any dawn you'd ever witnessed. And just as the ground began to tremble beneath your feet, an eerie silence fell once more, before the earth shattered with a roar that promised nothing good. The waiting was over. The storm had finally come. The blaze on the horizon flickered like a dying beast's eye, stubborn against the creeping gray dawn. The sky, still, painted in muted sepia and ash, seemed to swallow the fire whole, stretching the vast plains into an ocean of dust and shadow. Your horse shifted beneath you, restless, each hoof stirring the powdery earth, sending spirals of dry dust dancing in the fragile morning light. The air was thin, brittle, as if the land itself held a secret too heavy to breathe aloud. You could taste the bitter tang of smoke that clung to your throat, sharp and metallic, setting your teeth on edge. Around you, the ragged group huddled closer to their few stolen possessions, eyes flickering between the spreading flames and the uneasy horses. The woman's voice cut quietly through the low hum of nerves, measured but fierce. "We don't have time," she said. "What's coming will consume everything if we don't move fast." Your fingers tightened around the rein. The worn leather strap, cracked and soft from years of use, grounded you to the harsh reality. This land was no place for hesitation. The horses snorted softly, sensing your tense grip, ready to lurch forward at the slightest signal. You glanced again at the child holding that threadbare doll, frozen in the thin light, her small frame trembling like a flicker of candlelight on the edge of being snuffed out. Her wide eyes caught yours, and for a moment, the world shrunk to just that fragile, flickering spark of innocence in a place swallowed by dust and dread. A low rumble shivered the ground beneath your boots, subtle but insistent. It pulsed through the cracked earth, a heartbeat distorted and pounding, deep and relentless. The horses shifted uneasily, their breath puffing soft clouds into the cold air. You felt it. In your bones, the land was waking, and with it, something older and crueler than any man-made wound. Behind the woman's group, shadows lengthened, their shapes stretching and twisting as if bending under an unseen weight. Shapes you couldn't yet see clearly, but instinct warned were not human. They moved with a glide that sucked the breath from the air, slow but inexorable. The woman's eyes darkened. "They follow the fire," she whispered, voice raw with stories she wouldn't tell, something ancient, something hungry. Your heart kicked up, a wild rhythm matching the pounding beneath your feet. This wasn't the usual fight to repair fences or wrestle stubborn animals. This was a reckoning, raw and merciless as the desert wind. The distant flames spat out sparks like angry stars, drifting upward, then snuffed by a sullen breeze. The smoke twisted and thickened, a dark ribbon snaking across the plains. You imagined it like a black serpent, slithering silently, swallowing hope whole. Your companion, the younger rider with eyes too wide for his face, swallowed hard, voice barely a rasp. "We're not ready." You tightened your jaw, feeling the rough edges of exhaustion scrape beneath your skin. You'd endured dust storms, hunger gnawing at your insides, nights colder than your dreams allowed, but nothing so sharp as this creeping shadow bearing down on the fragile vestiges of your world. From somewhere beyond the fire, a long, raspy howl tore the silence, a sound fractured and broken, neither beast nor man, but some terrible echo of both. Horses stamped and snorted, reins taut in your trembling hands. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled a worn cloak tighter around her shoulders and fixed her gaze on the rising sun, now uncoiling its pale fingers across the plains. "They're close," she said, "closer than we hoped." The faintest flicker of warmth touched your hands. You reached instinctively for the last ember clinging to the cold ashes of the campfire, cupping it like a prayer. It was fragile, fleeting, but enough to remind you of all you fought for. Small moments of light clinging stubbornly against the overwhelming dark. You cast your eyes back to the horizon. There, smeared across the untamed earth, traces of blackened wreckage caught the light. A twisted scrap of metal, a broken wheel, shattered remnants of a world gone mad. You knelt, fingers tracing the scorched edges, as if the jagged metal could tell you the stories burned into its soul. A sudden gust whipped the dust into a wall, and the figures beyond the fire emerged fully from the haze. Ragged shapes staggering forward on the edges of collapse. And yet behind them, a darker mass stirred, something vast and slow, pressing relentlessly forward as the earth beneath your feet shuddered once again. Your rifle rested heavy against your side, but the cold weight did little to steady the rising storm in your gut. You swallowed hard. The horses shifted nervously. The child's small hand tightened on the doll's faded hair. You looked once more into her eyes, frightened, fragile, filled with a silent plea to survive what was coming. The woman's voice pierced the growing roar of the wind and rumbling earth. "This isn't just the end of a day or even a season. It's the end of what we knew." Suddenly, the ground quaked stronger. Dust exploded in sharp bursts beneath trembling hooves. And the sky exploded in a new blaze. An inferno with no mercy, swallowing the dawn whole. The figures quickened their pace. Desperation carved into every ragged breath. You drew your horse forward, muscles taut, eyes scanning the advancing storm for any sign of mercy. The silence shattered with a distant, terrible roar, ancient, furious, unstoppable. And from the depths of the rising dust, you glimpsed the first hint of what the earth had been hiding all along. This is the fourth, a shape, darker and larger than any shadow, moving faster than the dawn raging behind it. Something that would change everything. And it was already too close. The fire on the horizon flared and faltered like a stubborn beast fighting for breath. Your horse shifted beneath you, the dust swirling in restless spirals where its hooves stirred the cracked earth. The sky was a pale wash of grays and faded gold, as if even the dawn hesitated to rise fully, reluctant to spill light onto a land weighed down by unease. The sharp sting of smoke, mixed with the metallic tang of burning oil, hung thick, a bitter taste you could almost swallow. It clung to your nostrils, seeping into every breath, reminding you just how fragile even the wind was here. capable of carrying death and despair with the same indifferent ease. Around you, the ragged group drew closer, faces shadowed by exhaustion and dust, eyes flickering with the wild flicker of hope and fear intertwined. The woman beside you pressed her lips together, the lines of her face carved by countless battles with hunger and loss. Her eyes didn't waver from the distant blaze, where the fire's glow bent and twisted like smoke phantoms riding the air. "We can't wait," she said, low and urgent. "What's chasing us will swallow this whole." Your fingers tensed on the reins as the horses shifted impatiently beneath their riders, the dry ground crunching like brittle bones. The child, clutching her faded doll, shivered, trembling not from cold, but from the raw weight of everything she carried: memories, hunger, fear. You saw the cracked lips, the dull ache in those wide eyes, as she locked gazes with you for a brief, fragile moment. Behind the woman, the group stirred uneasily, steps slow but filled with unyielding will. Somewhere beyond the edge of the firelight, dark shapes moved, not human. Shadows stretched long and warped, sliding across the dust like creeping frost, claiming a forgotten windowpane. Your heartbeat tightened, syncing with the restless shuffle of horses and the muted murmur of voices barely daring to breathe. The earth below quivered with a rising pulse, a slow, sinister thrum felt more than heard. Dust rose in sudden, jagged bursts, as if the ground itself wanted to reveal its secrets, but was held back by an invisible chain. "They're not just behind us," the woman's voice sliced through the tense silence. "They're part of the land now, something older, something hungry." You swallowed dryly, the taste rough in your mouth, like the last sliver of stale bread gnawed in a parched throat. This wasn't a fight over fences or cattle rustlers. It was a reckoning, primal and unstoppable. The younger rider beside you swallowed hard, sweat beading despite the chill. His eyes darted nervously toward the horizon, searching for answers, even as his breath caught in his throat. "Faster than anything we've faced," he muttered, "moving too fast." Then the low rumble blossomed into a rolling growl that filled the dawn like a beast rising from the deep. Horses snorted nervously, shifting weight from hoof to hoof, tails flicking in agitation. The smoke thickened, wrapping around the sun's weak light, cutting it into slivers that barely warmed the cracked ground. One of the figures beyond the fire stumbled forward, a gaunt man, cloaked in ragged shadows, his eyes wild with exhaustion and terror. His mouth opened in a dry, rasping gasp, but no sound came. Behind him, the great shadow moved, an amorphous shape whose size warped the horizon and dulled the morning light. You felt the rifle pressing cold into your side, the rough leather strap biting into your palm. There was no denying the truth. Whatever this was, it was coming, and it had tasted fear like fine wine. The child whimpered softly, clutching her doll tighter. The softness of that sound, a desperate plea flung into an unforgiving wind, hung heavy in the air. For a breath, the world seemed to recede, leaving only that fragile thread of innocence against a backdrop of impending ruin. The woman's gaze locked with yours again, fierce and unflinching despite the storm gathering around you all. "They'll be upon us before noon," she said, voice steady, but filled with the weight of a warning too old to ignore. A sudden gust whipped the dust upward, swirling it into a haze that burned your eyes and scraped your skin. The horses snorted sharply, muscles tense beneath their sleek hides, ready to bolt at the slightest command or threat. It was a tension stretched tight over the cracked earth, snapping quietly but inevitably. You dismounted slowly, boots crunching on gravel and dry dirt, as you crouched beside a twisted shard of metal, the blackened, twisted remains of something once man-made. You traced the jagged edges without touching, feeling the coldness radiate like a wound on the land's scarred face. The fire flickered at the horizon, a dying heartbeat in an ocean of dust. But behind it, the shape grew, lumbering and terrible, the embodiment of a storm that carried no mercy or reason. You felt it beneath your feet, a tremor, sharp and sure, a warning whispered in the marrow of your bones. Whatever was coming didn't care about fences, about walls, or desperate children clutching broken dolls. And then, the silence shattered like the brittle ground underfoot. A deep, bone-rattling roar surged across the plains, rolling like thunder that carried no storm. The massive shadow surged forward, faster now, an unstoppable force, unrelenting as dawn breaking wild. Your whole body tensed, gathered tight like the bowstring pulled back, and in that friction, you understood. This was no ordinary fight for survival. This was the beginning of everything falling apart. And in the distance, swallowing the brittle light whole, the coming tempest roared with a voice older than the dust itself. An ancient hunger awakened at last. The horizon cracked open with a blaze that promised only one thing: change. And it was heading straight for you. The ground beneath your boots heaved again, a subtle yet insistent shudder that seemed to press the very air aside. The fiery glow on the distant ridge flickered like a restless heartbeat, fighting against the suffocating gray, casting long shadows that danced across the cracked earth, restless as the unease settling in your chest. The horses stirred beneath you, uneasy, their breath ragged in the frigid dawn, nostrils flaring against the corrosive bite of smoke, and something far fouler mixed in the wind. The battered group huddled close, their ragged edges blurred by dust and fatigue, but their eyes were sharp. The woman's hand tightened around her worn pack strap, knuckles white beneath skin, cracked by sweat and sun. Her gaze never left the horizon, where destruction bled into the sky, as if her body tried to anchor her to this land, even while the coming storm threatened to swallow it whole. A low murmur rolled among your fellow riders, a rustling of tense whispers, tangled with the creaking of leather and the dull thud of restless hooves. You caught the strained exchange between the younger rider at your side and another, a desperate thread woven from tight throats and stiffened jaws. No time left. They'll be here before the sun's high. The words hung heavy in the cold light. No romantics here. No last stand under a blood-orange sunset. Only the harsh reckoning that had been growing beneath your feet for miles. The earth throbbed with it now, an ancient pulse threading through the dust. You flexed your fingers around the worn reins as cold sweat traced the line of your spine. That twisted scrap of metal you'd found earlier sat heavy in your mind, an emblem of the world unraveling, its jagged edges whispering stories you feared to hear. From somewhere beyond the fire's hungry glow, shapes began to emerge, purpose dragging them forward in hunched strides. Desperation written deep into hollow faces, eyes caught between fear and distant hope. The child with the faded doll, ever so fragile, shifted nervously, a brittle flame flickering in this gathering twilight. The woman's voice broke the muted tension, gravelly and edged with something fierce. They're more than survivors. They carry the burden of what's chasing them. Her eyes met yours briefly, the weight of countless untold stories nesting in their depths. You nodded coldly as the horses stamped and whinnied, senses screaming against the unseen threat. The air thickened, choking sweet smoke replaced by a bitter, metallic sting that clawed at your throat. It wasn't a storm of wind or fire. It was something older, something primal. Suddenly, the earth rumbled again, a sharp tremor that shook dust from brittle branches, sending dry leaves swirling in desperate eddies. The horses reared briefly, necks stretched and nostrils wide, as if catching a scent no one alive should discern. The approaching figures faltered. Under that invisible weight, but pressed on, driven by raw survival instincts. Behind them, a deeper shadow lurked, immense and shapeless, blurring and rippling with an otherworldly hunger. You shivered despite the cold, your rifle's iron grip suddenly feeling like paper against the rising terror. The child whimpered softly, clutching her ragged doll tighter, knuckles paling. You glanced down, compelled to offer something, a word, a touch, but found only the brittle silence of shared dread. One rider cracked, voice barely above a rasp. It's coming faster, faster than any hell we've faced. Before you could answer, a guttural howl shattered the fragile quiet. Not human, not animal, something broken and wild, scraping the edges of your sanity. The horses stamped, a chain reaction of panic, spreading through the group. The ragged faces swiveled, searching the horizon backdropped by the eerie orange glow that now pulsed like the dying eye of a beast. Beyond the fleeing, dust-covered forms was the true menace, a monstrous silhouette that seemed stitched from shadow and dust, gliding with terrible intent. Your heart hammered, breath catching in your throat as the vast stain on the horizon grew, faster than the dawn, swallowing light with greedy tides. Your fingers trembled on your rifle, but never raised it. This was no enemy to meet with a bullet. This was something unlike anything you'd ever fought, an inevitable force unraveling the very stitches of the world. You felt it in your bones, a reckoning not wrought by man or steel, but drawn from the land itself. The woman's voice was suddenly louder, steadier. Brace yourself. Before noon, none of this will be the same. The cold settled deeper, sharpening every edge. The smoke thickened, folding around the sun in dark veils. The child's wide eyes held your gaze again, now shimmered with unshed tears that traced silent pleas for salvation. You swallowed, tasting grit and iron, the bitter tang of old wounds reopened. The last ember of your campfire lay cold at your feet. A fragile gleam of warmth you protected as fiercely as hope itself. And then, the earth convulsed beneath your boots, fierce now. Shaking dust in angry clouds, splintering the cracked surface like a nightmare clawing its way free. That monstrous shadow surged, breaking into sharp clarity, a terrible colossus carved from nightmare and ruin, moving with unyielding purpose. The rough shapes behind it scrambled, desperate to escape the fate lurking at their heels. The horses snorted, flared, the raw fear radiating off their trembling bodies. Riders gripped reins so tight their knuckles whitened. You fixed your gaze ahead, heart a wild drum in your ribs, as the furious roar of the approaching tempest tore across the plains, unyielding, merciless, ancient. And in that chaos, your weary breath caught as the horizon split wide open, revealing the first horrifying glimpse of what the earth had harbored, all along, beneath its dusty skin. Whatever this was, it wasn't coming to ask permission. It was coming to end everything, and it was almost upon you. The earth's tremor faded into a low, ominous pulse, an ancient heartbeat beneath your boots that refused to still. The fiery glow on the horizon burned like a blister on the cracked skin of the plains, stubbornly licking at the edges of dawn, while casting long, wavering shadows that stretched and recoiled like living things. Your horse shifted. Again, fussing against the tension binding your muscles, nostrils flaring to catch fleeting scents, darting on a ghostly wind. Smoke mixed with something acrid, metallic, a stench sharper than rusted iron scraping against bone. Around you, the ragged group huddled tightly, faces pulled taut with exhaustion and streaked by the dust of countless miles. The little child, fragile as a winged thing caught in a storm, clung to her doll as if it were a shiv against the coming dark. Their eyes, hollow and wide, reached out wordlessly into the space between the fear in their chests and the uncertain light falling steadily as the sun unleashed its pale fingers over the desolation. The woman's voice was low, but edged with steel, breaking through the dull roar of creaking leather and restless hooves. "We don't have the luxury of waiting," she said, lips pressed thin beneath a shadowed brow. "What hunts us isn't here for mercy." Her gaze flicked to the growing inferno, the flames painting a grotesque dance against the washed-out sky. You swallowed dryly, the bitter tang of smoke settling heavy on your tongue, as your fingers tightened around the rough leather reins, calloused and worn like everything on this cursed land. The horses around you snorted, muscles coiling, ears flicking. They smelled it too. Something not quite right. A hunger worse than any coyote or rustler biting at your heels. A deep rumble vibrated beneath your boots. Not thunder. Something more deliberate. A pulsing growl that rolled in waves across the barren earth. You felt it in the marrow of your bones, a resonance that prickled at the edges of your senses, like cold fingers tracing ancient wounds, long thought, sealed. Shapes began to emerge from the burnt ember haze, twisted forms hunched over by exhaustion and carried forward by sheer, brutal will. They moved raggedly, the dirt smeared across hollow faces, catching the weak dawn light, illuminating despair stitched into every line. The woman's group shuffled forward steadily, but behind them a shadow loomed, immense and shifting, a presence that seemed to drain the light away in a slow, suffocating wave. The child whimpered quietly, clutching the ragged doll tighter, as if clinging to a sliver of the old world before it crumbled into dust. You wanted to reach out, to offer something more than just the cold grip of your rifle, something warm and human, but all that met you was the brittle silence that followed fear's heavy footsteps. The younger rider swallowed hard, his eyes wide rimmed red from strain. His whispered voice cracked. It's coming faster than anything we've seen, faster than the wind's own fury. A sudden gust threw dust into the air, swirling dry leaves like desperate prayers caught in an invisible current. The horses jerked and stamped, the tension tightening until it snapped like a brittle branch underfoot. Somewhere behind the ragged group, a howl ripped the air, a sound fractured and unearthly. Neither beast nor man, a warning born from the darkest corners of nightmare. The woman's hand moved, steady and sure, lifting a worn cloth to shield her eyes from the spiraling dust and firelight. They don't hunt by sight, she growled, voice tight. They come for the soul. Your heart hammered hard against cracked ribs as you scanned the horizon. Beyond the flickering blaze stood the silhouette of that monstrous shadow, vast, shapeless, but undeniably real, pressing forward with a slow, merciless glide. It swallowed the burning light, blotting out hope with the weight of doom. Your grip faltered on the rifle, cold metal unyielding against trembling palms. No bullet would touch this specter. This was the dust and earth made cruel, an ancient reckoning clawing its way from beneath the bones of the world. The woman's voice cut through the thickening silence like a sharpened blade. Brace yourself. Before noon, none of this will be as it was. All at once, the cold seemed to sharpen, cutting into flesh and spirit alike. The smoke curled tighter, tendrils choking the sun, folding the world into shadowed folds. The child's eyes locked with yours once more, some fragile fragment of hope flickering in a sea of dread. Beneath your boots, the earth pulsed, a heavy, deliberate tremor that shook dust and dry grit into the air. You crouched beside the twisted shard of metal you'd found, black as a wound, tangled in the dust like a secret too bitter to tell. The jagged edges whispered silent tales of ruin and fire, a shattered relic of a world on the edge of collapse. Then the ground convulsed violently. Dust exploded in angry clouds, and the horses pranced and reared, panic radiating off their muscles like electricity. The monstrous shadow surged forward, revealing terrible clarity, an immense colossus carved from nightmare, moving with the inevitability of falling night. Behind it, the ragged figures sprinted, desperate to survive the fate that trailed them. The roar of the coming tempest broke free. It was no mere storm, but a crescendo of ancient fury and relentless hunger. You breathed deep, tasting grit and fear in equal measure. The heat of the dying campfire fading behind whispered memories. And as the horizon fractured wide open beneath the burning dawn, the first terrible hint of what the earth had been hiding at its core came into full, horrifying view. It wasn't just coming. It was nearly here. And when it arrived, nothing would remain the same. The ground beneath your boots settled at last. The trembling that had chased you since dawn, easing into a stillness heavy with unspoken relief. The distant blaze, once a raging beast threatening the edges of dawn, now flickered low, a softened ember swallowed gradually by the widening light. The horizon stretched wide and open, dust and ash settling like a final curtain on the day's relentless storm. Your fingers, stiff and trembling from the weight of uncertainty, loosened around the cracked leather. Reins. The horses shifted beneath you, their restless energy now calming in the wake of a threat past, or perhaps paused. You took a slow, deep breath, tasting, finally, air tinged with something other than smoke and fear. A fragile freshness, thin but undeniable. The woman's eyes, once sharp and wild with the tension of survival, softened as she stepped closer. The dust clinging to her worn clothes seeming less like armor and more like the remnants of a long battle, finally drawing to a close. The child beside her nestled a little closer, the faded doll held gently now, as if it bore the hope all their worn souls sought. You traced a weary gaze across the trembling silhouettes gathered, those whose paths had converged on the cracked plains to face an upheaval older and fiercer than the sun's heat. Or the dry ground, faces etched with exhaustion, yet illuminated by a slow-burning resilience. There was no grand victory shouted across the plains, no triumphant cry to pierce the quiet. Instead, a quiet acceptance wrapped the air, heavy as the dust, but softer, almost intimate. The fire's last embers, long extinguished by the rising sun, seemed to pulse faintly beneath your boots, like a heartbeat, knowing that even the fiercest storms bow eventually to the will of dawn. You let your gaze fall to the jagged piece of metal you'd discovered earlier, still lying half buried in the cracked earth. Its black edges caught the light in a muted gleam, a scar on the land that marked what had almost been lost. But here you were, here you remained. Beyond the tangled shadows, the monstrous shape that had loomed on the horizon dissolved into memory, no more than a scar in the waking dust. The ragged group, once fleeing and fearful, had found a tentative foothold, their steps now deliberate, grounded in a moment that spoke not of defeat, but of survival's stubborn pulse. The horses lowered their heads, nostrils flaring as they sensed the easing of tension, their breaths mingling with the quiet whispers of wind moving gently over the plains. The cold that had gnawed at flesh and spirit seemed to retreat, replaced by a softer chill that promised rest rather than battle. Your eyes found the young rider again, the one with pale cheeks and eyes wide from too many sleepless nights. He exhaled slowly, a breath you both shared, heavy with the weight of what had been endured, and the fragile hope dawning like the tentative sun above. No words passed between you, none needed to. The shared silence was its own conversation, a quiet agreement that for now, the worst had passed. The woman watched the horizon one last time, her gaze steady, the scars on her face deepened but smoothed by the relief that seeped through the air. She reached down, brushing dust from the child's hair, their small figure a fragile anchor in the vastness surrounding you all. As the child looked up at her, an almost imperceptible smile flickered, a glimmer of innocence preserved against a world eager to snatch it away. You allowed yourself a slow, weighted nod. Not a hero's triumph, not a tale spun in blood or glory, but a moment carved from the raw edges of survival. The plains were still, the dust settling as if nature itself exhaled after holding its breath for so long. Your gaze drifted skyward, where the pale blue of morning now painted the heavens in peaceful strokes, vast and calm as a forgotten dream. The bitter tang of smoke faded, replaced by the subtle scent of dry earth warmed by the sun's gentle climb. Somewhere nearby, a lone bird's call pierced the stillness, a small, sharp note that seemed to say the world would still turn despite everything. You slid from your saddle, boots sinking softly into the forgiving dust. The rifle, once a cold weight of tense readiness, rested easy at your side, no longer a burden, but a quiet reminder of all that had come before. You felt the rough leather of your gloves, the ache in your hands from endless chores and long days, but also something rarer now, a calm tempered by endurance. Around you, the ragged group began to move with a new rhythm, not the frantic scramble of flight, but the patient steps of those who know the land's harsh truths and, for an afternoon at least, have found peace. The wind returned, soft and steady, brushing over cracked earth and weathered faces alike. The plains stretched timeless and unchanged beneath the rising sun. Yet nothing was quite the same. For in the space carved by fear and fire, something else had settled too, a quiet strength, the stubborn lightfulness of survival. You took one last deep breath, filling your lungs with the crisp, clean morning air now stirring through the camps. The sun climbed higher, scattering shadows and casting a soft glow over the familiar terrain. The bitter edges of dust and smoke dulled, replaced by the gentle hush of a land resting, healing. And as you settled into the rhythm of this new dawn, the quiet stretched around you like a well-worn blanket, soft, enduring, the kind that carries you gently toward the comfort of sleep, with a promise whispered in the wind. No matter the dust, no matter the storms, life goes on. Your weary body eased, the tension finally unraveling as the plain's vast silence wrapped you close. There was no fanfare, no triumphal horn, just the slow, steady pulse of the earth beneath, whispering the ancient truth. This chapter closed with the sun fully risen, soft light spilling across the plains, and the knowledge that even in the harshest corners, peace finds a way to settle, faint but certain, as persistent as the dawn. And with that, you exhale deeper, skin warmed by the morning glow, heart steadied by the quiet enduring beneath endless skies.